A fresh headache for the Prime Minister as he searches for further measures to reduce immigration to the UK. It's like an episode of Roadrunner, this. Ever more imaginative ways and schemes. Will he succeed? The government's immigration advisers have recommended the visa route, allowing foreign students to stay in the UK for 2 years after their studies, should be retained in its present form. Let's speak to Brian Bell, Chair of the Migration Advisory Committee. Brian, good afternoon to you. Nice to have you with us. This was seen by many, I'm sure the great unqualified in some respects, but seen by many as one area that Rishi Sunak really could tackle. Too many people coming over. It was an interesting area. We know further education is a huge industry to our economy, worth billions of pounds, but there was a sense that some people were coming over, going to not necessarily moody universities, but universities and doing courses that weren't really worth very much at all, paying a lot of money, but it was a backdoor way to getting into the country with your family. Is that true or false, Brian?
Well, I think, it's very difficult to measure that kind of thing because people don't fill in a visa application saying, I'm coming mainly for education or I'm coming mainly for work. They just fill in a visa application. I think what we've concluded is what we've done is we've gone back to what the government itself in 2021 said were the objectives of this visa. And we've tested the visa against those objectives. And we've concluded that on almost all of the criteria, the visa is delivering what it was supposed to be delivering. And so by the government's own objectives, it's succeeding. And so, on that basis, why would you change it? So you weren't seeing, or you couldn't, assuming this was one of the areas you were looking into, you couldn't see this being used as a kind of ruse, a sort of backdoor way where people were, they were coming to do a degree in something, but it wasn't really at one of the obvious recognised universities. It was some college buried deep in a back street in South London. They seem to be the apocryphal stories we hear against this being part of the system. I mean, to be honest, that's a very, very, very small part of the sector. I mean, it's important to, if you think about it, we have these charts in our report where we show the number of students by the university rank in terms of global rankings. And in some sense, you might think, oh, it's very bad that we have universities that are ranked in a 1,000th in the world. But actually, when you think about it, the number of universities in the world, that's still very high up in the world rankings. And so actually, that's where the students are going. OK, they're not all going to Oxford, but they are all going to universities that are still, relative to their own country's universities, much higher up the world rankings. And so for them, it's a real, it's a step up for them in terms of their education. And then they want the work experience that they can potentially get in the UK to add to their CV when they go home. And most of them will go home. So, I think it's dangerous to sort of think, oh, because it's a university in, a different part of the country than where the top universities are, that for some reason it's not a good university. And of course, the other part of that is that in addition to coming over to do a degree course, you have the opportunity to work for a couple of years. That's also being called into question. What's your response to that? So, I mean, it's, why do we offer it? We offer it because we want to attract international students. The government has a policy of attracting, wanting to have 600,000 international students in the UK. That's their objective. So you may object to that objective, but that's the government's objective. So given that, you need to attract those students, and our competitor countries, Australia, Canada, the US, all offer this type of scheme. So if you're not competitive in the international market, you won't attract students. And in terms of what we're offering a fixed 2-year deal. So it's, you don't get the right to stay in the UK long term. It's temporary. And at the end of that 2-year period, you have to leave unless you've managed to get a really well-paying job that would make you eligible for one of the work routes that already exist. So, it's very time limited. And when we've looked at what they're doing on the route, they look very much like British graduates. Some of them do very well, some of them don't do as well, but that's true of British graduates as well. And in terms of bringing members of your family with you, I mean, I'm aware there's a lot of hyperbole attached to this, that, 27 members of your extended family, your nan, your grandparents, their parents, 17 cousins and a couple of Labradors all turn up. I'm sure that doesn't quite happen like that, but you're aware of that criticism of this scheme. So the government changed the rules. Well, first of all, I should say it was never the case that you could bring your dog and your nanny. You were only ever allowed to bring your partner and children. That was as far as it went. So it was just your immediate family. The government changed the rules last year for students to say that if you were on a postgraduate talk course or indeed an undergraduate course, so the vast majority, you could no longer bring dependents with you on the student route. Because of that, you also won't be able to have them on the graduate route. So it's essentially a restriction that they've already imposed on the graduate route, which says you can't bring dependents anymore. So there'll be almost no dependents on the graduate route. It's just PhD students that can bring dependents now. Okay. So that is already causing a very significant reduction in student numbers.
So so it has addressed that one element of it, but broadly speaking, this part of, I mentioned at the very beginning of all of this, Brian, that it's a multi-billion pound industry, further education. Get rid of it at your peril, as it were. That was critics of the government was, be careful what you do with this. It appears not very much is going to happen now. So as far as your research is concerned on all of this, that seems to be the right decision.
I mean, I think our view would be that the government clearly wanted to get net migration down. The changes to dependent rules that they made for students last year will do the vast majority of the hard lifting here, and already seems to be having a very big effect. If I'd have to guess, I'd say a bigger effect than the government might have expected at the time they made that announcement. Changing the graduate route, I think, would have more marginal effects. And at a time when we're still not certain how big the effects will be of that reduction because of the dependent rule, we might want to hold off and see what the effects of that are first before we think about making other changes.
There it is. Brian, thank you for your time. Really appreciate that. Brian Bell, who's the chair of the Migration Advisory Committee.